A repair technician in a small shop on the corner of West 34th Street in Manhattan powers on a used iPhone 15 Pro. He swapped the battery himself, a genuine Apple battery pulled from a donor device, not a cheap knockoff, not a counterfeit, a real Apple component. He hits power, and the phone tells him, right there on the screen, that the battery is unable to be verified, full stop, a warning message, a flag on his work, a digital scarlet letter burned into the software, visible to the customer, visible forever in the service history. The battery works perfectly, the phone runs fine, but the message stays. That technician's name is not important right now, but there is a third person in that story, somebody who put that message there deliberately, somebody who decided, at a very specific meeting, in a very specific building in Cupertino, California, that the customer should see that warning every single time. We'll come back to who that is, and why it matters more than almost anything else happening in the tech world right now. Because today, Monday, March 31st, 2026, we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most sophisticated, most legally embattled, and most financially consequential cover-ups in consumer technology history. This is not speculation. This is not a Reddit theory. This is what lawyers are arguing in federal court. This is what engineers are testifying under oath. This is what regulators in France, in Norway, in the EU, in Oregon, in Colorado, and right now in New Jersey are saying out loud. Apple built a system designed to make sure you never, under any circumstances, feel comfortable repairing your own phone. Signal number 1. The battery. You've heard of Batterygate. Most people think that story is over. It is not over. In December 2017, Apple confirmed to the world that it had been intentionally slowing down older iPhones through software updates, citing battery degradation as the justification. They said it was to prevent unexpected shutdowns. Critics said something very different, that it was to make your old phone feel sluggish, to make you feel the itch to upgrade. France's Paris public prosecutor agreed enough to open an investigation. Apple paid a €25 million fine in France for the throttling scandal alone, $500 million in the United States as part of a class action settlement that paid claimants approximately $92 each. Nearly $1 billion in penalties, globally, for a feature they didn't tell a single customer about for more than a year. But here's what nobody is telling you. The throttling was not the end of the battery story. It was the beginning of a much larger architecture. After Batterygate settled, Apple introduced something called parts serialization, where every component in your iPhone, from the screen to the camera to the battery, has its unique serial number digitally paired at the factory to the logic board of that specific device. A genuine Apple battery in one iPhone cannot be recognized as genuine when placed in another iPhone unless a technician uses Apple's proprietary GSX software to repair it. And independent repair shops do not get access to GSX. They never did. So even if you have a real Apple part and a skilled technician and perfectly working hardware, your phone will still show you that warning. Unable to verify. 3 words, engineered to follow your device forever. This is the system, not a bug, the system. Now the industry has a name for this. It's called parts pairing. And right now in 2026, it is the single hottest battleground in consumer rights law in the United States. Colorado's parts pairing provision went live on January 1st of this year. Oregon's takes effect in 2027. Both are retroactive to devices manufactured after 2021. That means right now, today, Apple is technically operating in a legal gray zone in the state of Colorado, where the law says, in plain language, that a manufacturer may not use parts pairing to prevent or inhibit an independent repair provider or an owner from installing an otherwise functional replacement part. Apple has responded with what advocates describe as partial compliance. Some functions restored, some warnings removed, and in the background, a legal team working around the clock to find the narrowest possible definition of functional. 68% of American repair professionals say spare part access has improved. 63 out of 101 surveyed say OEM parts are still not priced competitively. That's not victory, that's a managed retreat. Here's the catch, because there is always a catch with Apple. In June 2025, a federal judge in New Jersey denied Apple's motion to dismiss the Department of Justice's monopoly case against the company. The DOJ, alongside 16 state attorneys general, filed the suit in March 2024, accusing Apple of violating Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act by monopolizing the smartphone market. Judge Julian Xavier Niels looked at Apple's arguments and rejected every single one. Market definition too narrow? Rejected. Market share calculation methodology flawed? Rejected. Anti-competitive effect not sufficiently alleged? Rejected. The case is moving forward, and what it reveals about the architecture of the iPhone ecosystem makes the battery warning look like a footnote. The DOJ case is not just about repair. It is about everything. It is about why your iMessage turns green when you text an Android user. It is about why your Apple Watch barely functions when paired with a non-Apple phone. It is about why every app on your iPhone, every single one, must be downloaded through the App Store, where Apple takes a 30% commission on every purchase. The DOJ compared Apple to oil barons and railroad tycoons. That is not hyperbole lifted from a tweet. That is language from a federal legal complaint filed by the United States government. And simultaneously, the European Commission has fined Apple 1.8 billion euros for abusing its dominant position in music streaming markets. South Korea, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and India have all opened enforcement actions. The entire developed world's regulatory apparatus is moving in the same direction at the same time. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a pattern becomes undeniable. But now here's where we need to go back to that third person, the one who put the warning message in the software. Because in a contempt proceeding in the Northern District of California, a proceeding separate from the DOJ case stemming from the original Epic Games v. Apple antitrust trial, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers wrote 80 pages finding Apple in what she called willful violation of her court's injunction. She said Apple's response to her order strains credulity. She accused Apple of covering up its actions. She referred the matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential criminal contempt proceedings. Not civil, criminal. Criminal contempt against one of the most valuable companies in human history, with a market cap that has, at various points, exceeded $3 trillion. And who is the third person? It isn't Tim Cook. Cook is the face, the measured, press release-ready face of Apple's carefully constructed brand of integrity and privacy. The third person in the room, the person whose fingerprints are on these decisions, is a structural force that most consumers have never named: Apple's legal and policy apparatus. The team that spent years lobbying against right-to-repair legislation in 20 U.S. states. The team that, according to the Right to Repair Europe organization, helped crush a one-man Norwegian repair shop all the way through that country's Supreme Court, leaving the owner facing 23,000 euros in legal fees owed to Apple after fighting for 3 years, after hundreds of donors around the world crowdfunded 10,000 euros to help him. A company with a $3 trillion market cap extracted legal fees from a man who fixed phones for a living. That is not a legal strategy. That is a message. The message is, do not compete with us on repair. Do not even try. Here's what that message has cost you personally. iFixit, the repair advocacy organization, reports that in 2014, when the first right to repair law was filed in South Dakota, there was not a single original Apple part that an independent repair shop could legally purchase. Not one. Today, in 2026, you can buy 23 different spare parts directly from Apple for the iPhone 15. 23 out of hundreds of components. And the parts that are available? Apple charges a premium that makes the repair economics borderline absurd. In New York City, independent shops report that Apple's pricing remains at levels that make same-day repairs at a local shop arguably more cost-effective than going through Apple itself, where Genius Bar appointments are booked weeks in advance and standard repairs take 5 to 7 business days because your device is shipped to a centralized repair facility. Apple charges up to $329 to replace an iPhone screen, depending on the model. Third-party shops, using equally functional parts, charge a fraction of that. The right to repair movement estimates that the gap between Apple's repair prices and competitive market prices is not explained by parts costs or labor. It is explained by monopoly control of the repair supply chain. But here's the catch, and this one is bigger. In January 2026, Apple mailed out checks as part of the $95 million Siri privacy settlement, up to $20 per device. Because for years, from September 2014 through December 2024, Apple's Siri was accidentally activating and recording private conversations. And Apple knew. You talked to your doctor. You had a private argument with your spouse. You discussed your finances. And Siri was listening, logging, and in some cases those recordings were reviewed by Apple contractors. The settlement paid a maximum of $100 if you claimed 5 devices. $100 for a decade of your private conversations being captured without consent. And simultaneously, this is happening simultaneously. An iCloud class action, Gamboa versus Apple Inc., is alleging that Apple has illegally monopolized cloud storage for iPhone users by blocking third-party alternatives and forcing customers to pay inflated iCloud prices. In June 2025, a federal judge denied Apple's motion to dismiss that case. It is now in discovery. A separate App Store class action that has been running since 2011, 15 years, went to trial in February 2026 in California. Hundreds of millions of iPhone users who spent $10 or more on App Store purchases could be entitled to damages if Apple loses. And an AirTag stalking class action is working its way through the courts after a federal judge allowed key negligence and design defect claims to survive in March 2024. Battery throttling, parts pairing, repair monopoly, privacy violations, App Store commissions, iCloud pricing, AirTag stalking. These are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern. A documented, litigated, court-accepted pattern of a company using technological lock-in to extract money from consumers who believe they own the devices in their pockets. Here is the geopolitical domino that nobody is talking about. The EU's Right to Repair Directive, which came into force across member states, includes restrictions on parts pairing. If Apple is forced to comply with full EU standards globally, not just in Europe, the entire service revenue model collapses. Apple's Services division, which includes the App Store, iCloud, AppleCare, and repair revenue, generated approximately $100 billion in fiscal year 2024. That is not hardware money. That is ecosystem lock-in money. If the DOJ wins its monopoly case, if the EU forces open the repair market, if the App Store class action delivers damages, and if the iCloud suit succeeds, you are looking at a structural dismantling of the most profitable segment of the most valuable company in the world. That is not a fringe scenario. That is what federal judges in 3 separate courts are currently entertaining as legally plausible. And here is what Apple's hardliners inside Cupertino know that Tim Cook will not say publicly. Every concession made to the right to repair movement is a data point that regulators use in the antitrust cases. Every genuine Apple part made available to independent shops is evidence that they could have done it years earlier. Every software update that removes a "unable to verify" warning is an admission that the warning was never technically necessary. The engineers and lawyers who designed the parts pairing system are, right now, in depositions. Their internal communications are being reviewed. The judge who found Apple in willful violation of her injunction did not reach that conclusion based on public statements. She reached it based on the documents Apple tried not to show her. iFixit's Elizabeth Chamberlain put it plainly when Apple's self-service repair program first launched. Integrating a serial number check into their checkout process is a dire omen. Building the technology to provision individual repairs easily sets Apple up as the gateway to approve, or deny, any repairs in the future, with parts from any source. That warning was issued years ago. The courts are now catching up to it. The New York right to repair law forced Apple to make genuine parts available to independent shops at fair market prices. But Apple's use of device serialization continues. The law permits it. A Mac with a swapped component may still throw constant warnings. The New York Attorney General can impose $500 per violation in fines. But Apple's lawyers are in court right now debating what fair and reasonable terms means under the law. The gap between the letter of the regulation and Apple's compliance is exactly the width of a battery warning message on a screen. So here is where we are. Monday, March 31st, 2026. The DOJ's monopoly case is proceeding to discovery after surviving Apple's motion to dismiss. The App Store class action, 15 years in the making, is either in trial or awaiting a ruling. Colorado's anti-parts pairing law is active. The EU's enforcement machinery is engaged. And Apple is simultaneously sending $20 checks for recording your Siri conversations, while arguing in federal court that it does not have a monopoly. The next 24 to 72 hours are not going to resolve this, but the next 24 months will. And here is the binary that every Apple user, every person with an iPhone in their pocket, every small business owner who fixes phones, every developer paying 30 cents on every dollar to Apple's App Store, every person who pays $2.99 a month because they ran out of iCloud storage needs to understand. Either the courts, the regulators, and the legislators succeed in breaking open the ecosystem, forcing genuine competition in repair, in app distribution, in cloud storage, in payment processing, and Apple becomes a hardware company that competes on the merits of its products. Or Apple's legal machine wins. Every case, every state, every jurisdiction. And the parts pairing system, the App Store Commission, the iCloud lock-in, and the silent Siri recordings become permanent, protected features of a closed ecosystem that you rented when you thought you were buying. There is no middle ground here. That is not a rhetorical flourish. That is what the lawyers on both sides of these cases are arguing. Break it open or lock it down forever. The technician on 34th Street is still looking at that warning message. He knows the battery is real. He knows the repair is good. But the phone doesn't care what he knows. The question is whether the courts do.